Welcome everyone to this Zero webinar. Today we're delighted to have Martin Dent, the manager of the CRC program, to talk to us about the application process and how the program works. So most importantly, at the start, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting today and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So a few housekeeping points just for noting as we work through the next hour. By now, I imagine you're all familiar with the functionality of Zoom for webinars, but just in case, or a quick refresh, there's a number of buttons at the bottom of the screen. The most important one probably for during the webinar will be the Q&A function. If you've got any questions for Martin, please type them in there and we'll get through as many as we can during the available time. If there's any left, we will endeavour to get them addressed in an email that we can share after the session. If you see questions that you're interested in, so someone beat you to the punch, then please look for it. We'll endeavour to address the ones that get the most votes first, and then move on to those that have the sort of the low numbers of votes. If you have any technical issues while you're going, then please use the chat function for that. We'll monitor that in the background, and if there's anything we can do to help, we'll fix that for you as we're going. So just before I introduce Martin, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the growth centres themselves in NERA. So the growth centres operate across 6 priority areas in the Australian economy, more or less in alphabetical order. That's advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity, food and agriculture, medical technology, mining equipment and technology, and in NERA's case, energy resources. Each of the growth centres, during on a year-on-year basis, we produced a sector competitiveness plan. The sector competitiveness plan set out the knowledge priorities. So from a research perspective, this could be the knowledge gaps, if you like, that are being identified within our sectors. The SCPs reflect the challenges that are being seen in each sector as they evolve and adapt, and as times change. And additionally, all of the growth centres are very happy to discuss any ideas that you may have around research proposals that may be applicable within or sort of tangential to the sectors that we each work with. After the webinar, we'll send out an email with the slides and a few links. So there'll be links in there to our SCP and a few other bits of useful materials. So you don't need to take copious amounts of notes as we work through all of this, unless there are any particular points that you may be interested in. We'll also be sharing the webinar as a video within a few days after the webinar finishes as well. So I would like now to welcome Martin Dent. Martin has a long history with the CRC program, having worked in the delivery area since 2009 and CRC Projects in particular since their inception in 2016. Martin and his team are responsible for the delivery of the CRC Projects stream of the CRC program. This involves coordinating the application process, supporting the CRC Advisory Committee in its consideration of applications, negotiating grant agreements, and the ongoing contract management of the CRC projects themselves. So over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Francis. Just get my presentation up. So thank you for having me, and I'm hosting this this webinar. Yeah, it's exciting to be here. Usually I've done this live in the past, but doing one of these through Zoom is going to be good. Looks like we've got a lot of people on board, many more than we've had in the live ones, so that's great. In terms of what I'm going to cover today, thank you for that introduction. That's what my sort of role's been. Change slides, right? Okay, so hopefully we're rolling now. I'll give you a bit of a brief overview of the program, including CRCs and CRC projects, the difference between the two. Talk about the roles of the different key players. That's the Minister, the CRC Advisory Committee, and my department. Talk about the assessment process and some of the compliance pitfalls that sometimes applicants have. I'll talk about how to make your applications going from that good to competitive enough to be funded. It's a very competitive program, and I'll show you some data on that a bit later. But also note we do have program guidelines on our website and frequently asked questions and fact sheets that provide a lot more in-depth information in them as well. So there's sort of the key resource to go for more specific detailed information. In terms of the program objectives. They're on the screen here, but the program has been around, the CRC program, for 30 years. It's been a feature of the Australian government's research and innovation agenda. In 2015, following the Miles review of the program, which the government accepted the recommendations of, the program was refocused to achieve the government's priorities for applied science and research. And this included putting science at the centre of industry policy. And the objectives that were put together following that review are displayed on the screen. As well as these objectives, another important outcome for the program is around increasing the skills and capabilities in both the industry partners and the research organisations involved in the program. So here's a side-by-side of the two streams of the program. My colleague, Marcelo Alves, he's the program manager for the CRCs. On the left here, these CRCs, as probably most people know, are much larger collaborations than CRC projects. They operate for up to 10 years. The funding amounts are much higher. Selection rounds have been held for quite a while now, annually in 2 stages, and there's been to date 230 CRCs. And at the moment, there's 26 CRCs that are currently operating. On the right, we have the CRC projects that we're here to talk about today. They were introduced in 2015 and the first rounds were held in 2016. They undertake their more shorter term industry-identified and industry-led collaborative research projects. They're much smaller collaborations, as it says there, the average has been 5 partners. They operate for up to 3 years and with smaller funding available. So as it says there, up to $3 million, but and the minimum grant amount is $100,000 as well. And they also have much simpler governance arrangements and hopefully administrative arrangements. For instance, our reporting is much more simpler for CRC projects. And as I said, we've held our nine rounds to date, and we've been holding rounds every 6 months since the start of 2016. We've approved, the ministers approved 145 CRC projects since that time, and that includes 10 new ones that were announced last week for round 9. And but importantly, across both parts of the program, there is funding for a single specified term, and there's no additional funding available for a particular project. If starting a new project, some grantees have been successful for more than one project, but you can't get additional funding for your same CRC or same project you're doing. And also in both streams, matching contributions are required, and this can be in the form of cash and in-kind combined. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. There's no specific amount other than the matching requirement of them in total. In terms of the who are the key people and their roles, we have Minister Andrews. Given it's an Australian government program, she's the ultimate decision maker. She approves the grant guidelines for each round. She decides that through that the rounds are going to be held and opened, and also makes all the final decisions on which grants will be supported across both streams of the program. We also have Innovation and Science Australia, who the Minister has given directions to oversee the program. They've actually delegated that fully to one of their committees, the CRC Advisory Committee. And their role is around the merit assessment of applications and then making the recommendations based on them to the Minister. And they also have a role around the sort of broader oversight of CRCs and CRC-Ps and their performance in the program. And then we have my department, as I said, as Francis said, we manage all the selection processes. We manage all the current grant agreements in place, and we tend to be the main contact for the program, particularly for applicants. In terms of people often like to know who's on our committee, I won't go through them one by one, but we've got a very broad breadth of experience, some in academia, like Professor Chubb, former Chief Scientist and Vice Chancellor of a couple of different universities. We've got David Williamson, he's the Deputy Secretary in our department with the policy responsibility for the program, and then various other people with industry expertise and as such like that. In terms of a timeline for the program, this is the round 9 timeline which we had. So we're typically, as I said, it's sort of a 6-month cycle. We were typically open for around 6 to 8 weeks each time. I think that was about 7 weeks in round 9. and then we try to get the outcomes announced as soon as possible before the sort of year turns over. We announced the round 9 ones last week, and then generally projects can commence from either the 1st of January or the 1st of July, depending on which sort of half of the year we're in. In terms of round 10, as I said, it's the minister's decision on when rounds are opened, and it's her prerogative on the announcement of rounds opening. So I expect we'll hold a round 10 in the second half of this year, and it should open shortly, but I can't sort of commit to that specifically, but we have been running rounds every 6 months up to round 9. So it's a high likelihood we'll be opening the round soon. In terms of the assessment process we go through with applications, it's a single stage process, and applications are submitted via our online portal at business.gov.au. The main components of an application are your statement against the 4 merit criteria, and I'll take you through these a little bit later. There's also a budget that includes the partner contribution. So this is the contributions the partners are giving, but then there's also the budget, the expenditure of both the grant money and the cash contributions. Then we also have the project milestones as well that are one of the main components that can sometimes tell a story on how the project's going to be delivered and give some confidence around that methodology side. And then we also use these in the contract that we put in place with you to deliver the project if you are successful. My team goes through and does a compliance check of all the applications that come in, and I'll take through some of the details of that, I think, in a moment. And once the applications that pass the compliance checking are provided to our committee to make their merit assessments of the applications. As well as assessing the applications, they also receive some advice on the applications from both other parts of government that have policy responsibility. So for example, if your application's in the agriculture sector, then it would the Department of Agriculture would look at the application. Often the nearer applications are assessed by the energy part of my department for sort of how that align with the broader government sort of direction with that policy area. And they also, applications are assessed by growth centres that are relevant to your application as well. So it's a good idea to be in touch with them in the development of your application. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Then our committee will determine which applications they're going to recommend to the Minister for funding, and the Minister will make a decision on the applications. We will provide in writing to everyone the outcome of the application process. If you're successful, we'll look to be entering into a grant agreement with you as quickly as possible. We try to work on a 30-day timeline for that, and we're working, hopefully we're getting one more of them grant agreements executed today on that front. From the last current round, and then we'll, if you are unsuccessful, we provide you some brief feedback from our committee. In every round, we have had some applicants that have failed the eligibility and compliance checking. It is getting quite a small amount. I'll actually got the specific details on that. I think last round it was just 3 applications out of 130, so we aren't getting very many fail now, but we do have quite a number of applications that do have some issues that we need to iron out at eligibility and compliance, and it's really good if we can try to get them things, I suppose, essentially correct in the first time that you put it in. So you really don't want to be in a situation where, particularly if you're made ineligible after all the work that can sometimes go into putting an application together. One of the key issues we can have that makes applications ineligible is the right type of partners. So you need to have 2 Australian industry entities in your application, of which one of them must be an SME, and also 1 Australian research partner as well. In terms of what an Australian industry entity is, we call that you need to be registered, registered with an ABN, an Australian entity, and you also need to be a trading corporation. And what we mean by trading corporation is conducting, and importantly, intending to conduct trading activities. And trading is is the selling of goods or services. In terms of what we call a research organisation, there's 3 general classes: either an Australian university, a government department or agency that's undertaking publicly funded research, so thinking like CSIRO or the Australian Institute of Marine Science. There's also some state government research entities that can meet that definition as well. Or the third sort of category of research organisation is medical research institutes. But if you are sort of querying if you fall into them definitions. We've got look at the specific definitions in the program guidelines, and they'll help guide you on if you would meet that eligibility requirement. Other issues sometimes around compliance we get are providing contributions. All partners must provide contributions. If you're not providing contributions, we don't consider your partner, and that can then sometimes mean that you fall over on the minimum participants requirement. Also, all the partners must provide a partner declaration, it's called, and that's a document, one-page document that says basically you're willing to collaborate with the other partners, work to deliver the project, and provide the contributions as in the application form that's being submitted. We sometimes get some of them that are missing required information. For instance, they're not signed, or they've been amended to change what actually the commitment is. Sometimes they're missing altogether. Someone's just uploaded a blank document or something else in their place. And then sometimes we get inconsistencies between what's in the form and then what's on the actual what's on the declaration. So the ABNs might be different, but then we really need to know who the partner is that's participating in this collaboration, because that's sort of key to the sort of is this group capable of delivering the project. So also we often get a bit of inconsistency between the how much money is coming into the project and how much money is being spent. If sometimes the money that's proposed to be spent is double that of how much resources you got. So questions are asked around how can this project actually be delivered under them conditions, and then some other minor things like milestones that go beyond the project period. We get some people sometimes upload additional information to the application form as well, but you're not able to do that. So, if you do that, it won't be considered, because we only consider the information that's provided in the form itself. And then try to submit your application on time, and try not to leave it to not just to the last minute, but the system has validations in it. So to make sure you're putting in the sort of all the information in the parts. So if you're trying to do that at 5 minutes before close, it can be very challenging and quite stressful. And this diagram will probably show you some of that. So this is the submission times in the round 9, as you can see. We closed at 5 p.m. At 2:20, we got 50% of our way through the applications, and at midday we'd only got about a third of the applications in. We were open for 7 weeks, and actually I think it's only 6 weeks, but most people decided to wait to the last hour. I know that's probably human nature to do that. It's not unusual for that to happen. But try to avoid the strategy of really aiming for that last 15 minutes. It can be pretty intense. It can be pretty stressful within my team at that point, and I can't imagine what it's like out for the applicants as well. We get quite a few frantic phone calls at that point. But I think this was a little bit better than round 8, so that was encouraging. And I should say our system closes automatically at 5 o'clock. Even if you've got it open and you still think you're typing away, when you go to save your screen after 5 o'clock, it will not allow you to edit any. The system closes off and basically goes to read only at that point. So how can you make your application competitive? Funding is limited in the program, and it's clear that your application needs to be industry-led and foster that high-quality research that will solve the industry-identified problems through your collaborative research partnerships, but also at the same time have a role for SMEs in there as well. But how can you stand out and be that competitive? Your application should demonstrate a collaborative and integrated research program, and also include a clear indication of why you really need the CRC project. Why, not just that your project's appropriate and good, but why the CRC project stream is the right grant program for you. For instance, you might just have a second industry partner that's really just providing contracting services, so you don't really need that broader collaborative research, that sort of role. There's other programs that are more sort of one-to-one linkage programs. So the CRC projects looking at that more broader collaboration beyond just 2 partners. I'll probably say this a few times, but our committee always goes on about this when they really can't understand what applications are about. They are a group of sort of intelligent people with broad knowledge, but they don't have scientific expertise in your area. So writing your application in plain English and remembering it's not a scientific paper. Perhaps getting someone to look at your application from the outside of your area is a good idea. That's something that I think would be valuable to a lot of applicants. I'm trying to keep your responses succinct, coherent, and well structured. you need to address the assessment criteria, and this doesn't necessarily mean filling out to the to the 5,000th character limit in them responses. They are broken up into 3 parts. I'll take you, every 4 merit criteria have 3 parts, and sometimes setting out your responses in them 3 parts can be useful. And we do indicate what the specific value, I suppose, in the weighting of for the assessment for each of them as well. It's important that the language in your application is targeted to that general audience. Avoid jargon and the technical detail. And as I said, yeah, it's unlikely to be assessed by one of our committees. Unlikely to have the expertise with specific expertise in your field. So they need to have confidence that you can deliver the project. And then also finally, looking at the problem that's going to be solved or the opportunity that's going to be exploited, and clearly articulate how the solution you're putting forward will deliver on that. In terms of who the program's open to, participation in the program's open to all industry sectors and research disciplines, and funding's available to organisations from all sorts of places, industry, research, community. You can see the list of the variety of different partners in the different projects on the screen here. You need to, if you can explain what the partners are bringing to the collaboration, they need to have a role in the collaboration. Just having them to make up the numbers can sometimes can stick out to our committee and their assessments, or having a partner that's just there. Sometimes we get large industry partners that are just there just in case it's successful and putting in a token contribution. So having a proper role and making sure they've got proper buy-in to the project can help make your application stand out. If you are successful, all partners will be required to enter into an agreement with the lead partner called a partners agreement, and that's around how the project's going to be delivered, and it provides us assurance that there's a sort of a contract in place between the entities in the project to deliver the project. Our policy is we won't pay the second payment until that partners agreement has been submitted to us so we are assured that the project is actually yes, the partners agreement's in place and the collaboration is working together. And then back to the assessment criteria here. There are 4 criteria. They're all of equal, all 4 of equal weighting. Within the criteria, as I said, there's 3 sub-criteria. Assessment criteria 1 is around how the project will address the industry problem, how the project will foster that high quality research and encourage SME involvement. And these map back to our program objectives I had up earlier. Merit criterion 2 around the quality of your project. This is about the research you will do and the methodologies you will use, how your research will address the identified problem, and the education and training that's going to be offered. And sometimes that education and training can be around some PhD students that might be working in the industry partners, that sort of building that capacity. It might be even things like integrating something into a school, or increasing the skills of the staff in the industry partner as well, and how to collaborate, or just more generally. So that can sometimes be a fairly broad sort of response on that one. Criterion 3 around, this is about how you're going to manage and monitor your project, that sort of governance side of things, how you're going to manage the various risks that your project might have, and then also your access to the to resources and the personnel to deliver the project. And then finally, number 4, this is about the likelihood the project would proceed without the funding, and then also the total grant that the project will leverage. And finally, and also around stuff around the commercial potential of the project going forward. Now I've got a bit of a focus on a little bit of data side of things. This is often what people ask us, typical numbers and things like that. This is across the 145 projects we've funded to date. As you can see, the number of partners will vary depending on what you're doing and what's being undertaken. But really, partners need to be relevant to addressing the problem that's at hand that you're addressing. Having large number of partners and high contributions is not necessarily an assurance of funding. I suppose if you can get lots of money and lots of partners in there, you need to make a pretty good case of why you actually need the grant as well. But you can see in the data here, over 70% of the projects have had between 3 and 5 partners. But essentially, there is no limit on the number of partners you can have. think one of them ones that's greater than 10 has got almost 30 in it, but that's very much an outlier. But if you do have lots of partners, you're going to have to make a really strong case on how you're going to manage them all. CRCs have that typically 30, 40, 80 partners, even in some cases, but they basically have a company that's responsible for running the CRC. So you're going to have sort of a good plan if you've got lots of partners on how you're going to deliver it. A few more partner statistics here. This is over the last 4 rounds that we've held these ones. The SME given SME engagement's a goal of the program, having that almost 50% of the partners being SMEs is a really good outcome for us. And then you can see they make up about, total industry partners make up about 65%, but then when you're talking in total contributions provided, combined they're even higher than that, making 72% of the contributions, which is probably not unexpected given it's sort of solving that problem for the industry partners. But I should really reiterate, particularly on the contribution side, that there's plenty of different combinations that we see going through here. So these are just typical mixes, but there's definitely extremes where there's multiple research partners and just a couple of industry partners and all sorts of different combinations that have been successful. And that comment's probably even more relevant again here, because often we get asked, oh, how much contribution should we have? How much cash there should be? And how much the different types? What's the ideal mix? Now, this is the average mix over the last 4 rounds, and you can see it's averaged about a 1 to 2 to 3 return from the grant amount in terms of what these are the successful projects have provided in contributions. Look, we've had some, I think there's some that are basically at the matching point contributions, not much more than the matching in terms of contributions, but there's also, I believe, one that's around a 1 to 9 return as well. If you're actually curious on the specific data in the range, all the grant amounts and the total project size are on our website at business.gov.au if you want to see the 145 projects to date. But really on to iterate, there's not one right way or right mix. The only minimum is there's matching contributions. Another aspect of our program that we've had is priority funding. So from time to time, the government has decided that they're going to allocate funding for specific purposes within rounds. You can see there the different types of priority areas we've had. But note, all of these rounds have been open to general, I suppose we call them general round applications as well. So for ground applications outside of these areas. And there's also been a significant amount of money invested into them ones as well. Probably someone's typing a question now, will there be any priority areas for round 10? As I said, the minister determines the rounds are going to be held, so I will leave it up to her to announce in round 10 if there'll be any priority areas or not, and that's announced. That's always announced either before or at the opening of the round. Now, I won't go too much on about the growth centres because a lot of that, what I had overlaps with what Francis opened up with earlier. But some people do ask, how do the 2 programs, the CRC program and the growth centres program, how do they interact? We see them as complementary initiatives that enhance the productivity and competitiveness of the Australian industries, and the programs work together to facilitate increased and more productive industry and research engagement. I encourage you, like Francis said, to look at the sector competitiveness plans. If you're in NERA, if you're in that sort of NERA sector, the energy sector, have a look at theirs and sort of get familiar with where they see the priorities for the industry. If you're in the other areas, have a look at them. You are able to talk to your growth centres while you're sort of thinking about your proposal. They might be able to give you some advice either specifically on what you're putting forward or more strategic advice around the priorities they've got and how you might be able to contribute to that. But also be strategic and be aware of the government priorities and use the growth centres to keep up with what's happening in your sector. And I said I'd have some data on the competitiveness of the program. It's been, over the rounds, the DNA round that's marked there is the Developing Northern Australia round that we held in basically parallel to round 3 with specific funding for Northern Australia agriculture projects, I believe. So you'll see there were 10 projects successful in round 9, and although it looks like there was, well, there was less than round 8 and the previous rounds, but we did fund a similar amount of ones that weren't in the priority funding areas. So rounds, for instance, 6, 7, and 8 all have priority funding, which results in the amount of funding and grants going out being more. So we've typically funded around 25 million per round when there hasn't been priority. You take out the priority funded applications. So a lot of, I suppose, it's getting pretty tough in our program. It's getting harder and harder, and that's getting driven by the number of applications coming in, getting more and more. So I really encourage you to just put your best foot forward if you are going to apply, because it's a lot of work, obviously, putting together an application. So encourage you to do that. And that brings me to the end of my presentation component. There's a contact detail for my team, our mailbox, and our phone number in the department if you have any specific questions. We also have the business.gov contacts down there, and they're really good in the contact centre there and knowing sort of more broader issues, particularly if you're not quite sure what program you want. They can provide additional information on other roles industry programs. And they're available sort of more extended business hours as well to answer any questions on our program. And if they can't answer the question, they either put you through to us or ask us, and we'll be able to help them out and help you out. So now I'll hand back to Francis, and I think we're going to do the Q&A section now.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Martin. It was, I think you've answered a few, at least parts of questions for people who've been typing in as you've gone through. We've had a few questions which I will endeavour to work through. So if you've got questions beyond those that have been put in, then please do put them onto the system. So I'll start off with one here from Andrew Bell. I'll just read it out rather than trying to paraphrase it. So I understand there are a lot of unsuccessful proposals with each round, but resubmissions are permissible. Is there any opportunity for deeper feedback other than sort of the high level feedback that people get when they get declined?
That was if there's been any resubmissions. Can you resubmit? Yes. Yes. That's the question. Yeah. Yes, you can apply. You can reapply, and look, some of our usually when you reapply, you hope that you're going to be successful. When you reapply, you're not going to hope you'll be successful. You at least hope you're going to perform better, and that's typically what we see. It's getting tough, so even if you do reapply often, it's very tough to be successful. But yeah, some of our applicants have applied a number of times. I think I've seen even on a 4th try be successful. In terms of deeper feedback, you can get in contact with my team on their email address that I put up earlier, and I think we'll share the slides as well. So you can dig that up, and we'll. And I think it might have even been in the feedback email you might have received if you applied in round 9. So yeah, you can. We might be able to provide you with a little bit of additional information, but we'll can get in contact with us that way.
Cool, thank you. So next one then is a question from Melanie Farmer. So when a project is going to deliver jobs and growth but doesn't necessarily align with the growth centre, what advice would you have about who else might be worth engaging with or how to deal with this? And a couple of examples that Melanie's given are, for instance, allied health projects that are not necessarily MTP Connect or space law, which sort of could be lost cyber, but not really. So yeah, do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, I suppose no, you don't have to align with the growth. No, obviously you don't have to align with the growth centre at all. We've got applications that don't, and some of them have. There's always some partial alignment. I think I was looking at the data for NERA, and I think we've got 16 applicants that claim partial alignment with the energy sort of growth sector. But some of them are sort of maybe if you're making a solar panel, yeah, sort of partially, you might tick that box. But I think contacting other parts of government that are involved in the that area. So yeah, Department of Health, even the state and federal departments. We've just got a big space agency, or it's not that big yet, but it's getting bigger. Set up, the government's announced that, and that's a priority. It's one of the government's sort of broader priorities around space. So that's so maybe getting in contact with the Australian Space Agency might be an opportunity for them examples. But yeah, usually there's somewhere else in government. Otherwise, yeah, the key universities that in them ones as well would be good. Might be able to provide some good advice around that.
Very good, thank you. So I'll go now to the first question that went in. So this was Louise Milazzo that asked this one, and this one actually parts of this answer a couple of other questions that were put in a bit later on as well. Could you share the average pledged cash from industry? Now, I think you may have put that in one of your slides, but just in case if I overlooked that as you were going through, and what the percentage of that was compared to the total request. I think you said most of them are more or less one-to-one, but some not so much. The second part of the question is around why there were, essentially, I guess, why only 10 projects in round 9 relative to some of the other rounds where there were more. And then finally, and you did partially address this as well, do you have an anticipation, not holding your feet to the fire or anything on this one, around any priority areas for round 10?
Yeah, well, I think I can pretty much claim my answer to them around industry contributions over the last 4 rounds of 72. Not cash though. I've broken it down into different splits. I haven't got the split of the splits on here on the presentation. Well, if you just comply the typical mix across that, which would be, so industry was 72 contributions, and then cash made up about 25 out of 70%, so about a third of that. So probably, yeah, probably, I don't know, about a quarter of, about the same as the about the same as the grant amount typically, but that's on average. But there's lots of extremes, like I suppose, yeah, because you're asking to split the things. I spoke about where we had 10 projects in round 9. I think in round 8 we had 9 projects that weren't in priority rounders, so weren't in priority, and about $500,000 more we spent this round in non-priority. So I would say there was a similar amount to previous rounds, but the priority areas are what influenced that. Sort of, it was a really big round in round 8, 24 projects, $55 million. So that was why, and I can't comment on the priority area for round 10. That's something I'll leave to the minister to make any announcement or otherwise on.
Yeah, no, you don't want to get ahead of anything there, I suppose.
No.
So, real quick one here. Would an international corporation with an ABN, such as Microsoft, be an eligible Australian entity?
Yeah, well, if it's got an ABN, we say it's the Australian arm of the company. So, yeah, yes, it's trading. It's good. Yeah, it's got an ABN.
Yep, that's good.
I think we've got a couple like that. Like I think IKEA meets that definition in one of our grantees, for example. It's Australia, yep. IKEA Australia.
Yep. Okay. Something a little bit different here. Will small and new startup SMEs be disadvantaged if there was not much financial activity so far compared to a more established SME?
Not necessarily. I suppose it's more about the capacity you've got to deliver the project, and then possibly the having a history of doing things and experience collaborating might be an advantage. But yeah, I would say, yeah, it's probably bigger than that. We've got lots of startups as the lead partners in our program, but I think that's something the committee look at in particular detail. Look, our form does include some standard information around what your turnover is last year and how much money you spent on research, but that's actually a standard set of data that's collected for every single program in our department delivers through Oz Industry. So that information's there, and sometimes the committee will comment on various aspects of that, but then they can take into account the sort of how many years you've been going and that sort of things as well.
Very good. Another quick one for you. Probably this is probably more of a yes/no question than a longer one. Can schools, public and government be partners in CRCPs?
Yes. Yep. Can we be partners? Yeah. I think trying to think if we've got a school. I don't think we've got any schools, but I can remember. But I'm sure I've seen them as applicants. But yeah, definitely be partners. Can they be an eligible industry entity? Well, it'd be pretty tough to make the case. Maybe a private school can make the case it's trading. Don't know about state schools, but yeah.
Yeah, but certainly if it was something that where maybe the school was going to be, the students, they were going to develop something for the schools to use, then they could be a partner without necessarily being a yeah.
Well, they could definitely be a where you're implementing the technology as a testing area or something like that.
Similar vein, state government water authorities and I guess those sorts of organisations, would they be an eligible entity as well?
They could definitely be a partner. Would they be an industry entity? I believe we've got one even led by like South East Queensland Water or one of a couple of projects or one project. So we'd have to look into it specifically around, yeah, is it an industry entity? If it's state government, possibly not, because it depends how it's actually, what it's trading in as well. So, have to look at the specifics on that one, but definitely a partner, but whether it's an industry partner, to look into that a bit more.
Cool, okay, thank you. And then one that got a few more votes here. How does the priority area influence funding? I think you sort of addressed this when you were talking through it. But yeah, I guess when there is a priority area, how does that influence the way that the funding is distributed across the round?
Yeah, sure. So when we have a priority area, we have, it's been announced every round to date with a specific amount associated with it. So when we go through the committee go through the applications one by one, and we usually have a recommendation whether it's a priority area from other part of government, to be honest, because that's really useful for our committee because it's usually been driven by sort of a policy area now. Other part of government, and they determine whether it's in the priority area. If it is in the priority area, then basically they're filtered out, the ones in the priority area, and funding applied to them first until essentially these are the two for recommendations until that funding's essentially exhausted, and then then there's another pool of funding that would be available for more general applications, and then it would be applied to that. Typically, yeah, the funding's been used up in the priority areas. If we had the case where the priority area was so competitive that we wouldn't have the case, we would move them to the general pool, the applications, if it just missed out in the priority funding to the general pool, but that's typically hasn't been the case today. It's generally been more competitive in the general pool of funding.
Very good, thank you. So a question here from Sarah, who's also been voted up by a few others. Could a successful lead partner in previous rounds apply for another project in a future round? And I guess the follow-up part to that question, even if the previous round is not, even if the previous project, I guess, has not been finished yet. Yeah,
I believe we've got a few cases of that. Yep, Defentex, a Melbourne-based company doing defence-related work, military work, had three projects to date, and I think their first project's just finished, but they had three on the go at once, and they were just different projects, different aspects. So yes, you can be successful while you've still got another one for a different piece of technology, for instance. And there's a few other cases as well where we've got more than one project to the same organisation.
Cool. I imagine from the Research Institute side, that would be across multiple projects anyway, wouldn't it? Yeah,
in terms of research partners, I think if you look down our data, University of New South Wales has like 20 plus participations across the time in CRCs, Ps. So, definitely on the partner side, and CSIRO's got plenty as well. So but on the lead partner, there's a few cases where they're successful more than once.
Yeah. We've got an anonymous question here. So how much focus or priority is placed on the sector competitiveness plans of each growth centre, given that their own funding doesn't currently extend beyond where the Round 10 project might conclude? Consequently, will new and emerging opportunities be considered?
I suppose at the moment, the sector competitiveness plans are what the growth centres have put together. That's where they see the priorities of their sector, and then we do get the commentary that comes in on applications from the growth centres themselves on the applications, and then I suppose we expect that they would then reflect on how it aligns. That's a specific thing we ask, how does it align with your sector competences plan? And yeah, in terms of beyond like just because a round 10 project might conclude beyond where the growth centres may currently are sort of, finishing their funding, then it doesn't mean that their priorities in there, that what the work the growth centres have done now is not relevant for that, because they're thinking forward around their sectors as well. I don't know if Francis, you want to add anything to that?
No, I've been. It was an interesting question from our side. I mean, we certainly would like to think that our sector competitiveness plans continue to look out to a 10-year horizon. So as and when that 10-year time period ends, I guess dependent on when the growth centres themselves seem to be around, then that would still that there would still be at least a certain amount of applicability in those. Clearly, 10 years in any industry, your crystal ball gets quite fuzzy by the time you get a couple of years out. But we all do what we can to provide as much future insight as we can. It's an interesting question here from Melanie. So, are there any neglected growth centres or topics we could put some attention on? I'm not sure about the neglected growth centre part, and maybe I shouldn't even comment on that one. But yeah, are there any areas? I guess, are there any areas that you've seen where you would have liked to have seen applications that you haven't come through? Any areas that you?
Yeah, that's hard to specifically, given we're like, if you look at the breadth of the projects we supported in round 10, from ones that have linked to like space industry to agriculture, some autonomous vehicle work and stuff there as well. That's linked to agriculture, smoke taint in wine. So it's I suppose that all our projects are on our website. She's welcome to go have a look and make a decision, have a view on where there might be some opportunities. But our committee does assess it on like where, against the merit criteria, on what's the best projects, what's the best overall value for money. So, and given they are basically, they're not CRCs which are addressing a whole industry problem and trying to boost the whole industry necessarily. Often these are addressing a specific problem for the firms that are involved in the project. So even if two things are doing similar, they still might benefit two different firms different ways. But that said, if you can demonstrate some spillover benefits more broader to the industry, that can sometimes look really good, because of your value for money, I suppose, to drive that, like making the Australian industries more competitive. That sort of case can be really boosted up. That's by sort of, I suppose, sharing the benefits of it a bit broadly as well.
That's great, thank you. So here's a question from Mervyn. It's around IP. So generally, sort of, what's the situation with project-generated IP?
Okay, well, that's something that should be dealt with in your partners agreement at the start, and even better, have that agreed before you've actually submitting your application, because that's where sometimes we tell someone they're successful and then they have to negotiate where the IP is going to go between the university and more than one industry partner. But basically that's up to the partners. We would just encourage you, whoever's going to have, I suppose, the IP or shares in it, are going to, the organisations that are best placed to exploit it in the long run and bring back benefit to Australia in turn from that.
Very good, thank you. So another anonymous one now, and so this one, are there any sovereign capability or security considerations applied by the review panel that proposers need to consider or address when they're putting their proposals forwards?
Yeah, so I think those that have been following our program closely will see, as we've changed, I think the last couple of rounds, we've sort of increased that sort of requirement around, I suppose, the security side in particular, about the national security considerations. A couple of our committee are very keen on seeing that applicants have considered that, even if they've said they considered it and they can't see any issues identified. So that's applied. And then the sovereign capability, yeah, that's an interesting one, because that's probably something that's come up obviously in the last few months as well. So I suppose that's how you can maybe generate some sort of competitive advantage against, for not other applications, but also for not within Australia as well, to sort of address them government priorities. And when we do define government priorities in our guidelines as the growth sectors, but we also, there's some more broader science and research commercialization priorities, but also against any other priorities the government has. And we do actually include a point in our form where you can stick in a priority that's completely, that you can justify and give some evidence why that's a priority. It might be something that's completely unrelated to the other priority areas, that the more sort of ones we define, but it's a bit more broader than just the growth sectors and the other research priorities.
Interesting. Okay, so another one now, this one from Robert, with a follow-up question, which I'll ask. So I'll ask these as a pair. Can you give examples of CRCPs that have commercial entities? And then I guess the second part to that, are there any circumstances under which funding is repayable? So they are actually they're quite different parts of the same question, but John's put his question on the back of Robert's.
Okay. CRCPs that have, I can see the questions too. Yeah, he said CRCs, but CRCPs, well, they are a commercial entity. I would say they have to be essentially a commercial entity, an industry entity conducting trading activities. So if he's talking about CRCs, well, that's not my program, but there's plenty of spin-out companies that have come out of CRC. An example that's been a CRC project, because they're my easy ones, are Frontier SI spun out of the Spatial Information CRC, and was successful in our program a few rounds ago. There's a company called DigiCash spun out of the Capital Markets CRC, and that's been successful in the CRC Projects program. But there's also been plenty of other commercial entities that have come out of CRCs, not come out of a CRC, but I know, I believe Seeing Machines company in Canberra that was successful in our round one and has been one of our ones that's finished and been successful. It was a spin out from like ANU as well, I believe.
Very good.
And
yeah,
the second part, funding, where funding is repayable. Well, if you haven't, we do a reconciliation at the end where you have to get an audit at the end of your project. If you haven't spent, or if you can't provide us an audit for all the money that's been spent, or even if you don't even report all the money's been spent, we will ask for the balance back when you finished your project. Or for instance, you start your project, we make your first payment and you don't do anything and you decide we mutually terminate the project. We had that happen once, I think, and they paid us back the money. But you can read our grant agreement if you want to know what the sort of powers, what sort of different roles and the sort of expectations on the two parties legally are, if you get to that, and there are sample grant agreements available on our website.
Very good, very good. Thank you. I'll have a quick go at the anonymous question that came in just a minute ago there. How would you suggest we engage with the growth centres? All the growth centres have their own web presence, and on there are contact details for various people. So you could either drop an email to whatever the contact address is for the growth centre, or you could find an individual potentially working for the growth centre local to where you are, or stalk them on LinkedIn, or there's many ways. Certainly, you all know who I am now, I imagine, through this one. And if worst case, drop me a line and I can point you in the direction of someone from one of the other growth centres. So, where are we? I think we are getting near the end here now. So this was one of the very early questions that went in, and it's quite a specific one, but I'll ask it just in case you have any thoughts. This Susan Evans, seeking to identify a manufacturer for a medicated intrauterine device. Is the program in a position to assist us with this? Any thoughts on that, Martin?
Well, I'm not, but I'd talk to MTP Connect. So that would be my advice on that one. Or if you've got, I think that would be the best start. Yeah, we don't. I don't have any detail on that, but yeah, talk to MTP Connect. Yep. That's the Medical Technologies and Pharmaceuticals Growth Centre.
That would have been my answer as well. Good on you, Martin. Thank you. The last few questions here, and I'll try and get through them quickly before we run out of time. Any advice for engaging Chinese firms or concerns we should address in an application, given the current climate, I guess, in terms of friends to the
I
north?
think maybe not specific engagement with them, but in terms of addressing it in an application, I'd say explain the risks and tell us how you're going to manage them risks. I think it's important. It's something our committee would expect to see in the application if you've got some international partners, and we do have international partners from all over the world, including some in China in the CRC P program, but there's even more international partners in the bigger CRCs as well. So yeah.
Very good. Okay, of the projects previously funded, do you have a figure of the technology readiness level for their products before and after? So I guess the change in TRL as they've gone through.
Mm-hmm. I don't have anything in front of me. We have been collecting that data for, I believe, maybe it's around 8 and 9. Maybe we did it in around 7. I can't remember. It's sort of a newish thing, and we're sort of doing that to sort of not just for the application, but then to almost for some evaluation data down the track to see if the projects feel like they got to the spot they were committing. They said they would, but I think typically we see them numbers, the starting number, I suppose, from that 1 to 10 scale, probably being at least the midway point. Sometimes you get sort of that 3 to 6 starting and then moving through to that sort of commercial 8 to 9. Occasionally I see ones that aren't moving at all, when that's more when the committee gets interested in them, if they're same number, but that's pretty rare, probably typo as much as anything. But yeah, I can't get specific numbers. They're the sort of rough ideas, I think, just from my feel from having hundreds of applications come through our team.
Yep. 2 questions left. We might get through them both before we run out of time here. How important is it for a project to end up generating a product?
Well, I think our guidelines say you need to be able to generate a product, service, or process, a tangible product, service, or process. It's sort of a requirement. So it's important there is that sort of commercialization sort of plan, idea, product that's going to come through. But yeah, it doesn't have to be a product, but if it's just research for the sake of research, or and it can be on that pathway towards the product being generated, but it needs to be fairly advanced. Early stage clinical trials, sometimes we see applications come into them and they might be eligible, but they find it pretty hard to be very competitive when the sort of applications are actually getting them product in. But then that sort of more advanced clinical trials, there's some applications, you could see some grantees are delivering that sort of thing on our current successful list.
Yep. Now you answered this one here from Amanda, but I think you did answer it as you went through, and that was just where the applications get sent to other parties for assessment.
Yeah, the growth centres and other parts of government with some expertise in that area, and also my team does a bit of a data. We just do a bit of a review in terms of some of the data on them as well, and provide that to the committee.
Yeah, I'm just really quickly now trying to look through the questions that have come in on the chat as well. There's one here. Can I ask if the research related to subsurface oil and gas industry would be suitable for a CRC-P in the energy transition? I guess from our side, I think it would depend on the application itself, what it was proposing to do. If it was something that was moving toward a commercializable outcome, or as you said in your earlier answer there, Martin, if it's going to be research for research's sake, then probably not. But if it's going to be developing a new product or a service, then yes. We've had that one. Medical devices or any POC for formulation efficiency in a clinical trial setting acceptable for a CRC-P? That's our last question. I'm not even sure I know what it means.
I would say put that in plain English. That's where some of the challenge, that's typical of a challenge, like that might be really obvious. I'm sure that's really obvious for the person asking it, but for any, is that point of contact for formulate? I don't know. Like medical trials, yeah, early stage, pretty challenging. Medical devices, yeah, like if you go back creating an device, yeah, and if whatever it is, a medical device, I suppose we've got, if you look at our list of grantees, there's plenty of them are medical devices, from diabetes, blood spot things, to like that you can mail in to and get it tested, to a watch thing you can wear that's going to track something similar, I think. I can't remember exactly, but if you can spot them on our website as well. Particularly around round 6, there's lots of AI stuff that we had a priority funding that was medical related.
Very good. Someone sneaked in here right at the end, so if people will just bear with me while I ask this question, then we will close the doors. What are the options for submitting, what are the options to submit a CRC-P application while being a partner in another CRC program?
Yeah, well, you can definitely submit an application while being a partner in another CRC project or in the bigger CRC grant side of things. We've had lots of cases of that. And even if you're the lead or if you're not the lead, yeah, you can definitely be in more than one project.
Excellent. Well, we'll let you catch your breath there now, Martin. So look, thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. As I mentioned at the start, and this will address a question that was in the chat as well, we will be sharing Martin's slides in the next couple of days, along with a few links. So there'll be a link in there to our SCP, and of course, if you're not within the energy sector, then you can find similar SCPs for the other growth centres on their websites, along with lots and lots of information, contact details, and so forth. Thank you everyone for joining us. I think I've learned a lot from this, and it's been. I hope Martin's managed to answer all the questions that came through. We certainly got to tick them all off. Let's put it that way as it went along. As the webinar closes down, there will be a quick survey that will pop up, and if you've got 2 minutes just to click through and answer the questions, that would be very, very much appreciated. And on that, I will release you all back to your day jobs. And thank you again so much for joining us today. Thank you.